In recent years, the war in Ukraine has intensified on several fronts, not only on the battlefield, but also in the military recruitment strategies used by Russia. An especially disturbing aspect of this conflict is the way young Africans are being enticed, deceived and forced to participate in a war that is not theirs, driven by empty promises and systematic manipulation. Scenes that could easily be confused with historical reports of human trafficking are repeated today, under new disguises, fueled by Russian urgency to replenish their strength and maintain their war machine. The process begins apparently legitimately. Young people from countries such as Ghana, Cameroon, Senegal, and Zimbabwe receive tempting offers to work in Russia. Agents or intermediaries, often local or with the appearance of institutional legitimacy, have vacancies that promise high salaries, housing assistance guaranteed, and, for many, even the chance to obtain Russian citizenship. These are difficult offers to ignore, especially when compared to the harsh economic reality of these countries. For many young people in vulnerable situations, with no prospects for employment or growth, these proposals emerge as an opportunity to change their lives. But the reality that awaits them when disembarking in Russia is brutally different. Soon after arrival, these young people have their passports and identity documents retained, under the justification of administrative proceedings or need for registration. With this, they completely lose their autonomy. Not to mention Russian, and without understanding the country's legal system, they become hostage to a structure that coerces them to sign contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense. Some do not even have the idea that they are enlisting for military service. Others sign under pressure, believing it is just another step to start working. The coercion is direct. With documents retained and under threat of arrest or deportation, many end up giving in. The lack of translators or any legal assistance makes the process even darker. There is no time to question, reflect, or seek help. They are quickly inserted into the basic training system, a minimum protocol that is little prepared for the frontline horrors. According to reports, this training often lasts a few weeks, enough to teach the basics of gun handling, simple combat tactics, and some geographical orientation when there is. An emblematic case that gained international notoriety is that of Jan Onana, a young Cameroonian who was enticed with a promise of administrative employment and was eventually sent to one of the most intense conflict zones in eastern Ukraine. In less than 2 months after his arrival in Russia, Onana was in the trenches, facing constant bombings and attacks without any psychological or tactical preparation. Stories like his silently multiply, told only by survivors, colleagues, or, in many cases, family members who late discover the fate of their missing beings. With the increase in cases, alarming reports of high mortality rates appear among these African combatants. Most are placed in the risky positions in the battlefield, with precarious equipment and little chance of survival. According to international human rights organizations, more than 60 deaths have been confirmed only among citizens of Cameroon. But this number may be much higher, considering the total of missing and the absence of light official records by the Russian authorities. Meanwhile, the promise of high wages, some speak up to 5 times what they would gain in their home countries, is rarely fulfilled. Families awaiting money shipments never receive anything. The conditions of combat, added to negligent treatment and lack of legal guarantees, make these young people live in a kind of limbo, where they are not recognized either as official soldiers or as hired workers. And the promise of citizenship at the end of a year of service, used as bait for many, almost never materializes. Instead, there are reports of young people being discarded after injury or getting sick without any assistance or compensation. This exploration system goes beyond the trenches. Russia has also used foreign labor, especially Africans and Asians, to work in ammunition factories and war-related industries. The bait is the same, supposedly civil jobs with good salaries and stable conditions. But when they get there, they find that they are working in dangerous industrial areas, at the constant risk of Ukrainian attacks and with little or no protection. Many do not even know they are in strategic places for military production. There are records of dead workers in bombing, without their names even appearing in official lists. The cruelty of the Russian recruitment system is not limited to the manipulation of young Africans. Another even darker mechanism has been employed frequently: the enticement of illegal immigrants detained within Russia itself. Systematically, Russian authorities offer these individuals two options: facing immediate deportation to their home countries, where they are often persecuted or live in conditions of misery, or sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense and go to the front line in the war. It is an institutionalized blackmail that transforms desperation into fuel into the war effort. This type of recruitment is silent and almost invisible. Many of these immigrants do not have family members or local support that may denounce abuse. Without access to the media or lawyers, they are sent directly to the training fields, where they receive the same shallow and hurrying treatment as the others. In a matter of weeks, they are already in combat zones, without anyone knowing their names, their stories, or what led them there. In many cases, there are not even formal records of their involvement in war. They are armed ghosts, fighting for a homeland that explores them without shame. The impacts of this practice are not limited to those directly involved. In African countries where these young people depart, a wave of concern and indignation grows. Governments such as Cameroon try to curb the military exodus, but bump into the lack of control over intermediaries and the limited ability to monitor the movement of citizens abroad. In Ghana, for example, protests emerged requiring the government to take steps to protect its young people from the false promises of Russian recruiters. In some cases, diplomatic authorities try to intervene to locate and repatriate citizens, but face resistance from the Russian authorities or the complete absence of information about the whereabouts of those involved. For families, the pain is constant. Many spend months or even years without any news of children, siblings, or husbands who departed towards Russia. Some receive short calls, some only messages sent by colleagues who get a hidden cell phone. And there are still the most tragic cases: informal notifications of the death of a loved one, without body, without documents, without explanations. In rural areas of countries such as Senegal and Zimbabwe, whole families live in the anguish of waiting, fed by an increasingly remote hope that their children return with life. Meanwhile, Russia expands its strategy. In addition to Africa, countries in Asia have been constant targets. Bangladesh, Pakistan, and even North Korea workers were identified in combat regions or Russian military factories. The pattern repeats itself: promises of civil jobs, obscure contracts, document retention, and subsequent send to risk areas. In some cases, there are evidence of agreements between authoritarian and Moscow governments, in which the export of labor is used as a currency of exchange for political support or economic aid. The presence of North Koreans, for example, was identified in various regions of Russia, acting both in construction and in activities directly related to the war effort. The goal of the Russian government is clear: to maintain the stream of reinforcements constant, without overloading the local population with new mandatory enlistments that could generate internal protests. By outsourcing human sacrifice, Moscow transfers the weight of war to the shoulders of foreigners, especially those in a situation of extreme vulnerability. This strategy not only reinforces the army with cheap and disposable labor, but also creates a system where the dead have no face or voice, are replaceable pieces in a brutal gear. Within this scenario, reports of serious violations of human rights arise. International NGOs, such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, have published alarming reports on the treatment given to these foreign fighters. Lack of access to medical care, precarious food, exhausting journeys, and severe punishments for those who try to escape or refuse to fight. In some cases, there are reports that injured African soldiers were abandoned on the battlefield by their Russian superiors, without any attempted rescue. Human life in these contexts is treated with total contempt. Exploration is not restricted to the body, but also to identity. Many of these young people are required to wear Russian uniforms and adopt false names in military records in an attempt to camouflage their true origin. This makes any more attempt to identify their families or foreign authorities even more difficult. In case of death, bodies are buried in ordinary ditches or simply disappear, as if they had never existed. A calculated erasure that even prevents mourning. Meanwhile, within Russia, state propaganda tries to mask this reality. Local newspapers, TV shows, and government profiles on social networks display carefully edited images of African soldiers smiling, receiving medals, or voluntarily affirming their support to the Russian cause. These reports, however, directly contrast with the testimonies of survivors and family members. Truth, as always, is far from the cameras and official speeches. It is in the lost eyes of mothers who do not know where their children are. It is in the exhausted bodies of workers used as shields. It is in the cruel gear that transforms poverty into ammunition. As the war in Ukraine extends, Russia continues to expand its recruitment tactics beyond geographical and moral limits. What was once a punctual strategy became a systematic model of exploiting people in social, economic, and legal vulnerability. The logic is simple and cruel. The more desperate the person, the more easily manipulable he becomes. And the farther you are from the international spotlight, the lower the chance that someone will report their disappearance. This is the ideal profile of foreign soldier in the Russian war gear: invisible, disposable, and silent. The case of young Africans is only the most visible face of a structure that grows in the shadows. There are reports of foreign students at Russian universities who, by losing scholarships or residence status, are also enticed to military service with promises of regularization. Young people who have arrived to study engineering, medicine, or foreign languages end up forced to exchange books for weapons, with the dream of training interrupted by direct pressures of officers or veiled threats of expulsion. Even those who do not go to the front line are swallowed by the logic of war. In Russian industrial regions, factories linked to ammunition production, tanks, and other war equipment are supplied by foreign workers hired under false promises. The risk is evident. These facilities are constant targets of Ukrainian bombing, and workers are kept in exhaustive shifts, often without the right to adequate protective equipment. The differentiation between the soldier and the worker dissolves in the modern battlefield, where everyone saw targets. From a humanitarian point of view, this model represents a silent crisis. There are thousands of young people exposed to a war that are unaware, without preparation, without guarantees, and without return. The promise of citizenship after a year of service, propagated as a prize for its participation, is rarely realized. Those who survive report that processes are locked by endless bureaucracies or annulled by allegations of contractual break. In other words, they fight for a homeland that will never fully recognize them. The situation is so critical that in some African countries, activists and journalists have started to map the missing informally. There are lists circulating with names, starting dates, last known location, almost handcrafted efforts to fill the void left by the absence of official answers. In small communities, the silence over these young people becomes an undeclared mourning, and the fear that more family members will fall into the same trap it becomes constant. In Zimbabwe, for example, whole villages avoid discussing the theme publicly for fear of reprisals from local intermediaries that continue to act as recruiters. The expansion of recruitment to Asian countries further deepens the severity of the situation. Vietnam workers, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan were also identified in Russian military factories. In many cases, governments with Moscow facilitate this mobilization, sending citizens under contracts that hide the real working conditions. The idea of jobs abroad is used as bait, hiding direct involvement in an armed conflict. Already in North Korea, there is evidence that the mobilization of labor to Russia happens with the direct endorsement of the Pyongyang regime, which sees in partnership with Moscow a route for strategic support. This reality opens a deep ethical problem: the instrumentalization of poverty and vulnerability as pieces of a military strategy. Instead of protecting the weaker states, both Russia and some countries of origin put them on the fire line. The foreign soldier recruited under these conditions is not just a victim of war, but a victim of a global system of inequalities that pushes him, without alternatives, to the front. War in this context is no longer just a clash between nations and becomes a gear fueled by the suffering of the invisible. And the most alarming, this model can become a dangerous precedent. If the international community continues to ignore this kind of practice, nothing prevents other military powers from beginning to adopt similar strategies. Instead of national conscription, it comes to importation of vulnerable. Instead of public war debates, criticism is silent with propaganda and misinformation. Human cost is immense, but conveniently diluted in patriotic narratives, contracts without translation, and opaque borders. The denunciation of this system is, above all, a call to responsibility. More effective monitoring and denunciation mechanisms must be pressured. It is urgent to protect the target populations of this type of manipulation. And it is essential to hold the state or private agents responsible for this gear. The war in Ukraine has already reaped thousands of lives. Allowing her to continue fed by the suffering of young people exploited in silence is to compact one of the darkest sides of recent history. What is at stake goes beyond the battlefield. It is a matter of deciding what kind of world we want to build. One where poverty is used as ammunition, or one where human dignity is an unenforceable limit, even in times of war.